Hello and welcome to Epiphytic Cacti. Today I wanted to talk about no IDs. So no IDs are just epiphyllum that you get that either they bloom incorrectly for what the name was actually given to them, or you get them without a name. It's really, really difficult to identify a no ID, particularly just from a bloom picture, because blooms are actually just incredibly variable. They can be incredibly variable in color for some plants. They can be incredibly variable in pictures, depending on the time of day that you take them. Like if you take them outside in natural light in the morning, you'll end up with a cool cast to your colors. If you take them later in the evening, you'll end up with a much warmer cast to the colors. And it can just really alter that, let alone if they are taking them at night with the flash on, really, really, really alters the coloration of the flowers. If you take them indoors under different kinds of lighting, it can really alter the colors of the flowers. So we don't actually try to identify them in most cases. There are very few epiphyllum plants that are actually identifiable on site. And that would be because their bloom is so incredibly unusual. It is also just really, really ill-advised to even attempt to try to identify most epiphyllum based purely on their flower. The reason why is because there are, like I said, there are a lot of epiphyllum flowers that actually look kind of similar. I mean, I think that there are thousands of registered hybrids. Just trying to take a flower like this, and actually this flower is kind of unusual, but I'm never going to try to identify it. I don't feel the need to be honest. I don't, I don't sell plants, and I appreciate even like flowers like this that are absolutely gorgeous without a name. I just appreciate them because they're beautiful. I don't appreciate them because of their name. If I was a seller and it had like actual value to have the name, like if it was a very sought after hybrid, I would try to actually collect or obtain ones that had, actual proper names. But about identifying them even just off of bloom alone, because a lot of times there are actually characteristics in the branches themselves, in how they grow, in when they grow. And, sometimes branches have a little bit of a different coloring cast. Sometimes the plant itself, like it will be pendant, it will hang down like this. Sometimes they grow straight upright like this. Sometimes they have only triangular growth. Sometimes they have deeply lobed flat growth, etc., etc., etc. So the plant in and of itself is also very important if you are even trying to go down the path of identifying it, which, like I said, in most cases, I just say leave it as a no ID. I think that's the proper and the important thing to do, because you don't want to see something like this and be like, oh, I saw a picture of something that looks like this, throw a label on it, and then, what ends up happening is you'll throw a label on it, and maybe you'll trade it, or maybe you'll sell it under a name that you just applied based off of a photograph. And the person that you sold it to or gave it to might actually be pretty expert. And in that kind of way, they might actually see the branch on the plant and immediately know that that is incorrect. Or when it blooms, that it is incorrect, because maybe it wasn't actually the right bloom size. Maybe the coloration was just slightly off. And so in that kind of case, what will happen is you basically hurt your reputation, and you want to be really, really careful about that. And even just really careful about checking to, cross-referencing and checking to try to make sure that the plants that you have that are actually named, that everything seems kosher there. You want to go look them up online and compare pictures and stuff like that. Use the Facebook groups, get a registry from the Epiphyllum Society of America and cross-reference that with the size, with the colors, etc., the growth habit, because most of those details, as you see in my other videos, like I read them out, like what the descriptions actually are from the registry. The registry's got so much more value, even though there's a cost incurred. It's so valuable to even just have. I guess I should say too, like, to me, I just call this a no ID. I don't, I think that there are a lot of people, and it's not a bad idea, to actually keep a record of your no IDs. So like, if this was the first no ID that I've ever gotten, I might actually call it no ID 1. If I have another no ID, in my collection, like maybe a bloom that it's like, oh, that's not really what that is, like I'd call it no ID 2, no ID 3, and just kind of keep a record of them like that, so that there's a record of what kind of is and isn't a no ID, and maybe a little documentation, like this is purple orange, the way that the label that was on it sort of when I got it was just kind of the color. But I also think that there is some danger in giving it any other kind of name other than a no ID. And the reason why I would say that is because you can have an unfortunate issue where people think that that is the actual hybrid's name and they will pass it on like it's a real hybrid, and then there'd just be a lot of confusion for a lot of, you know, the collectors or sellers, and it's just a really bad practice. So like you want to be very careful about trying to give unknown hybrids like this nicknames. Let's say that I was like, oh, this thing reminds me of like orange sherbet, and I started calling it that. Then people would think that that was the actual hybrid's name, but it's not. So you really shouldn't nickname them at all, and just be very, very clear, like, this is a no ID. Like, period. I don't know what it is. It's just a no ID. And you want to be very careful too, like I said, about, I think, in the community, like people giving you names for no IDs. There's an unfortunate thing sometimes. Like there's a lot of times that I see some flowers go by, you know, like a Padre, Pegasus. These are two flowers which I think are quite commonly thrown out as names for everything that looks kind of similar. And I've come across some rather strange things for those hybrids. Like one of the things was like somebody claiming that their hybrid had a fragrance. Padre doesn't have a fragrance, and there's not two varieties where one is fragrant and one is not. So you can end up with kind of curious stuff like that just because it looks kind of similar. Padre is one where, you know, it's just a pink flower. I mean, it's just like a standard cup and saucer pink flower. So it's something that's very easy, because there are a lot of cup and saucer pink flowers, to just throw the name Padre out there for that. And then you can have sort of the same kind of issue with something like Pegasus. You know, Pegasus is a great big beautiful flower, but you see that a lot because there are actually a lot of flowers that look very similar to Pegasus. And so you kind of catch that a lot where it's like, oh, well, it looks like Pegasus, and then you run away with the name Pegasus, but you know, there are a lot of flowers that look like Pegasus. And even though Pegasus was something that was widely, you know, widespread in a lot of people's gardens and stuff, that doesn't mean that you should call it Pegasus just because somebody said, oh, it looks like Pegasus, or somebody tried to identify it like that. Like I said, there are very rare cases where I think that you can do something like that and get away with it. But we're talking flowers that are so totally identifiable on site because there is literally nothing else that even remotely looks like that flower. And I think that I did a video a while back on Sakurahime. That's one. There's nothing else that looks like that flower. So if you show me a picture of that flower and you're like, oh, what is this? I'm going to be like, that is Sakurahime. I know without a shadow of a doubt, because there's nothing that looks like it. Definitely just leave the no IDs as no IDs. It's okay. Look at this. It's absolutely gorgeous. It's okay that it doesn't have a name. I'm going to keep it loving anyway for like as long as I can keep it alive. Absolutely. Thank you for watching. I hope this was informative, and happy cacti growing.